We've got two really exciting sessions that run back to back, looking at how technology can enable us to tell stories in a new way through a technique called object-based media. So we'll be finding out what object-based media is in this first session, and in 30 minutes time we'll hear some real-world examples from a number of different creatives and filmmakers and storytellers and journalists in terms of how they're using it to tell different stories and communicate different types of content. Now, I think object-based media is quite an exciting development in the way we tell stories, because if you think about it, we've made films pretty much the same way ever since films were first made, in a very linear fashion. Films had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and what consumers saw was effectively what the director wanted them to see. It's edited together and pre-packaged. As we'll see that when we start talking to our panelists in a second, that can now change. Object-based media allows some of those components to be sliced and diced and rearranged, and ultimately can help deliver a unique individual experience to everyone who's watching a piece of content. So as I say, in half an hour's time we'll hear a little bit more about some real-world examples, but because this is a new technique, we wanted to set the scene first. Now, you can ask any of our panelists questions using the Glisser app. You'll see a URL at the bottom right of the screen there. If you go to that URL, it's glsr.it/BVE18 on your device, all through the BVE app. You can use that to ask your questions. They will appear on this iPad, and I'll put them to the panel as we go. But let me introduce our panel of experts who are going to tell us all about object-based media. We have our academic expert, Marian Ursu, who is a professor of interactive media at the University of York. Researching this topic for the BBC is Phil Stenton, who's lead user experience research partnerships guru at BBC R&D. Welcome to Phil. And then somebody who's actually making content using object-based media is Julius Amedume, who is a director and writer at Visual Perceptive Media. So I'm hoping that between all of you, you're going to be able to help enlighten us on what object-based media is and why it's important. So, Marian, imagine we are a class of students in your lecture and you're trying to tell us from first principles what object-based media is all about. What does it do? What's it for? How is it different to regular media?
Okay, let me try first. If you're students in a classroom, anyone has any inkling about what object-based media might be? Ooh, okay, so that's a good baseline to start from. I'll try with a metaphor. Storytelling originated around the campfire, and then we started to scribble on walls and then scribble on smaller bits of rocks, papyrus, and so on and so forth. So initially, around the campfire, the storyteller adapts to the audience and tells the story to the audience that they recount in a fashion that engages best the audience. Then the media forced us to reshape our storytelling innate talent on a linear format, and we've developed over thousands of years, we've developed the craft of storytelling fantastically well on various media, print media, television, film, radio, and so on and so forth. And now technology enables the media to be responsive to ourselves. Therefore, we kind of came the whole circle, and now a mediated story, something that we captured on video, audio, and so on and so forth, with computing technology, maybe with a bit of AI, but not necessarily, could allow us, allegedly, better experiences than we currently have with a linear incarnation. So I'm not dismissing the linear form, I'm just suggesting that this is a new form that is potentially valuable.
So Phil, you've been, I guess, helping to build some of the tools to create and consume this content. What does it look like? Take us through the experience from a consumer's perspective. If I'm consuming object-based media, how does my experience change?
So the thing to think about is when we make films and TV programs, They're generally made and edited, and a version is created, which then gets broadcast, sent through the delivery chain, and the consumer, the audiences, consume it as it was intended. In the case of object-based media, because the objects aren't the assets, the shots, the video, the audio, the data, isn't put together until later on in the delivery chain, then you're allowed to be more, it allows you to be more flexible. So for an end user who, an audience member who may be, well, let's take, I was watching Countryfile on Sunday, and they got to a bit where, lovely, see all the scenery, it's always sunny in the UK when Countryfile's filming, and they got to a bit where they were going to do a bit on abattoirs. And so the presenter said, you may find some of the scenes coming up a little stressful. Now, in an object world, I could, as an audience member, choose to not have that. To say, okay, show me something else for that length of time, and then go catch up with the rest of the program. So for the audiences, it gives more choice to watch the things that you feel that you want to watch, and to make those decisions at a later date. It's different from, do I watch that film or that film? It's a sort of in-the-moment responsiveness to audience needs.
And from the BBC's perspective, why the interest in this? Because we started off by saying this meets a need for meeting those sort of ever-growing demands from consumers for something unique and tailored around them. Is that why you're looking at this? Is it a response to that kind of shorter attention span culture that seems to have developed?
Yeah, there are a number of dimensions that are enablers from object-based. It could be that you're doing catch-up and you've only got 20 minutes, but it's a 57-minute long program, so you want the 20-minute version. So with object-based media, you can reconfigure and keep the artistic integrity and the story arc in 20 minutes, so that the person commuting to work can catch up. Or we send things to different parts of the world where different cultures find different things acceptable. So a different version of the program has to be made for each different, whereas if you keep the assets separate, then you can then have them composed when they're delivered to those different countries.
So Julius, you're a content creator, you write and direct content. This sounds terrible for you because you're used to creating a beautifully crafted 30-minute or 2-hour piece of content, and you want that to be consumed as you've envisaged it as a director, surely? Or does this give you something else?
No, I think as a storyteller and as a director, I think I embraced it because it helps me tell a story to a bigger audience, but at the same time it helps me tell that story and personalize it to each individual person in that audience watching that story. So as a content creator, it's more work for me to do, but the end result can only enhance the audience's experience.
So what does it look like from your perspective? Take us through the mechanics of what it means to tell a story through object-based media rather than in this linear fashion. How does it look different? How does it behave differently?
It's the same as if I was just telling a singular story, but I have to think about it from different points of view and different types of ways. I have to think of it, for example, the male protagonist's point of view. I have to think about it through the female protagonist's point of view. And I have to also bear in mind how it can affect each person, each point of view, and how it can enhance their viewing experience. So it is a lot more work to do, but the end result is more desirable. And as a storyteller, my job really is to serve the audience.
And when you've, as I mentioned, we'll see some kind of other examples of object-based media work shortly, but when you've created productions and content through this method, what's been the reaction that you've had from the audiences? How do they feel about that content?
It's a lot of the audiences have embraced it. At first, some people might be a bit puzzled. Some people might scratch their heads because they're thinking, how does it work? How can they get around it? But I always say that the proof is in the pudding. And with this thing, it works behind the scenes. And a lot of people, they haven't even realized that the story has changed before them, which is my overall goal. It's just so they've had a better viewing experience.
So that's a good lead in to what I wanted to ask you, Marian, which is it sounds like as being an audience member, potentially a bit hard work this, instead of being a lie-back experience where I enjoy a piece of content that's been crafted for me. Sounds like I have to do some work here, or maybe not.
Well, I just made a note. I wanted to intervene, so I'm glad you invited me here. From the point of view of the audience member, the experience ought to be as the linear one at the moment, and it will be linear, whatever you do. The one member of the audience can only experience the story in one linear shape. But really the craft is, can we improve on that? And maybe comparing current formats and genres with object-based media formats is not the right way of thinking, because the current genres and formats, documentary, drama, news, have been crafted linearly. And we don't want to just insert some adaptability there. We want to understand what is possible when the medium adapts. And we have to build on those. So I'll give you maybe in these three genres. In a documentary, I sometimes see something and I'm dying to ask, why is that? Or really, tell me more about this. I want more detail, and I want to be able to drive in that way the story. Not just those two questions implemented in a documentary would give more freedom. Of course, more production cost, but possibly more production cost, but far more reward. In news, I want to argue, I want to question, so I want multivocality. That's again not possible. BBC has to give that perspective and that perspective to be kind of neutral, but imagine a space where more than one voice can be easily inserted. In drama, think how many people play games and like narrative games and like to drive the characters and jump from a location to the other and jump in time. Maybe those are means that would allow us to tell better television stories as well. So I think we have a baseline, but what we really need to do is to have people like Julius to create the new forms that are suitable for this medium.
So Phil, we have our object-based content. Take us through what it means as a consumer to access this. Do I need a new device to use it on? It sounds like something that's only really going to work in a non-linear platform, for example, on the BBC iPlayer. Is that correct? And what do I have to do? Do I have to click on things? How does my individual experience play out?
So there's a range of things. Yes, it's what we're thinking out is more interactive nonlinear devices. So a lot of the work so far is online, and you can download it from our website, Taster, where we put experimental stuff up there. And there's within that there are a different set of triggers that might trigger the different paths, the different type of experience that you get. Some of those will be the user does something. So we did a couple of instances of interactive narrative. One called Our World War, where you chose the path through, and another one was First Day, which was done by the casualty team, where you are the doctor who are turning up for the first day and have to make the decisions in the hospital. And that the experience pauses for you and you have to make a decision. But then there are more implicit ways in which it could be the time of day. It plays out differently depending on the time of day. So for us, if it's before 9 o'clock, it might be one version. If it's after 9 o'clock, it might be a more edgier version. And there, the audiences don't have to do anything except turn up at one or the other. So there are both. Audience does nothing, and it plays out depending on its situation, its timing, its location, and then others where people are asked to make decisions and to interact.
We've got some good questions coming in, and I'm going to put those to the panel in just a second, but I just want to ask Julius first, what the impact is on the production process. We've talked a little bit about the benefits to the storytelling process, but obviously as a director, your job is to deliver those stories within a budget. It sounds like this could require a lot of extra content, a lot of extra camera angles, a lot of extra scenes, more post-production, more complex workflows, all for content that not everybody's going to see. So does that create a challenge in terms of the budget and economics of creating content?
Yeah, it initially does create a challenge because you'd have to shoot maybe 2 or 3 times more amount of stuff. But I think what I found as I went through the process, I could limit that down by being more specific on just the certain threads which I thought would be more popular, and then spend a lot less time on some of the threads which I thought might be less popular and so forth. But then at the same time, I had to just make sure that everything was covered. So a lot more thinking goes into it, and you have to be a lot more organized, and a lot more planning goes into it. But I'd just say your workload would increase by maybe about 20% on the whole.
So great question. Looking at I suppose I could best say the emotional impact of object-based media. And Marian, this might be a question from you and from the research you've done. And Julius, I'm keen to get your ideas as well from the work you've done. But the question is, have you got examples of object-based media being delivered in a way that deliberately puts the audience on edge? In other words, are you kind of just trying to make everybody have a happy, wonderful experience? Or from a creative point of view, can you use it to generate an emotion, even if possibly that's negative?
We're only doing research, and the nearest to this is not, unfortunately, is not object-based media, is the game space, where we're looking at measuring emotional engagement and then build the AI that drives the game experience in a way that either pushes you into, actually that's what we're doing now, we try to draw people more in, but at the same time you need to have some blockers, and there are ethical questions. How much do you go about it if it's a horror movie? How much do you draw? How much do you want to scare? So very, very relevant questions, but I think we're a bit too early to answer them. What we need to first do is, and I want to make a point about making, these are story spaces that are hard to craft. Making a linear film is very hard. Making a good TV program is very hard. Let alone making something that is going to be delivered in various ways to members of the audience. That's very hard. So we need to craft a bit more there.
So Julius, have you set out to challenge your audience in new ways?
Yeah, I think this can be used through different genres. But I really do think stuff like horror, sci-fi, and normal dramas, I think this can enhance it quite a lot. And in terms of what you mentioned about telling the stories, what I found when I did some of the first test stories, what I tried to do was create a script which could be delivered in the different genres, but would work across the board. That would save me time, it would save us money, it would save the production. So just being smart and savvy as to how you go about it and plan it is gonna be the thing that wins in the end.
I've got 2 questions that I think are really important, because moving out of object-based media for a second, we've heard a lot recently around debate about whether social media creates a bit of an information bubble, that people only see what they want to see, and therefore you can get potential issues where people's mind their political opinions are reinforced, and the potential for the media to broaden the horizons are lost. And a couple of questions really is that potential for the audience to make that selection a dangerous thing? Could it be just pandering to them? And does it run the risk of just creating a bit of a sort of self-fulfilling information bubble? Any thoughts on that?
Take it, yes?
Yeah, good first, yeah.
Certainly not, because it's the storyteller skill to engage the audience as the storyteller wants. In a movie, we are taking on an emotional journey, and the way the storyteller tells the story is how we kind of are drawn into the story. That's the storytelling craft. So if you want to just respond to something that Joe Bloggs wants, you could make that, but is that rewarding? Is that what you want to do as a creator? The technology, the underlying technology, AI techniques now allow you to make all sorts of various emotional engagements with the member of the audience. So why not, in somebody who likes a series of news items, challenge them with something quite different and break that bubble? very easily possible. Instead of plus is minus. So really what I want to say to conclude this idea is that there is a lot of versatility behind object-based media, and it's really up to us to use it in a way that is ethical and that is engaging.
Phil, is that something that's been on your...
I think it's a finer grained tool, and it's a new medium, and we really need to understand both the craft of telling good stories and telling good nonlinear stories, and also the ethics. Like anything, whether it's film, theatre, whether you're making object-based media, you still have to, the culture and the policies and the way people use these things will emerge, and it will be different across genres. So if you're talking about emotion and in drama, can you just take somebody just that little bit beyond their comfort zone, but safely, rather than with the blunt tool we have now, is if you watch Walking Dead or whatever, then you're in there, so you don't watch it. And there might be something you would really enjoy if you could just sort of smooth it out a bit. So all those things and the community of practice that we need to pull together to explore and experiment with this are all to do. So they're very good questions, and the answer is it depends what we do with it.
So Julius, have you had to sort of think about the ethical dimension of object-based storytelling?
Yeah, as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, I believe this just will give us more choice in the end, because instead of me just telling a singular story to you, I now give you the choice to have that same story and make it branch off in different directions, in which is more tailored towards your own and your own emotional experience, but at the same time still come back to the initial straight path in which I wanted you to be on in the first place.
Another question that kind of follows on naturally from that is whether there are particular ethical considerations in news coverage of object-based media. And we've got, in a few minutes, another BBC colleague who's been focused, I think, more on the news side. But I suppose you could say it's one thing in fiction and dramatical storytelling, where it kind of doesn't matter fundamentally where the story ends up. But in news, actually, that could be really important. Is that something from an academic point of view you've thought about? Is there a right and wrong answer?
There's always one reporter is constrained to the context in which they interpret the event, and you get that reporter to respond to various ethical requirements, and they do it. But here's the question: why not have 10 reporters, all responding to some clear ethical guidelines, but all representing a good perspective of that event? And me, as a person who received that report, having the ability to interact with that report. And even more, maybe to insert, as we do now with Twitter. I get the news program, and I go on Twitter and send my thoughts. Why not make a connection between that, loop it back into the production process, and allowing me to see the result of that engagement? So I think, yes, it could be misused, and it will be misused, I'm sure, but the potential for being used more appropriately is fantastic, and culture is a multitude of voices. Object-based media.
Any other thoughts on news? You may not be news experts.
Well, without stealing Rob's thunder later, is there is for news, you can look at it in depth, and you look at it in breadth and perspective. And the breadth and perspective is going to be in the hands of the delivery chain, the broadcaster, and what the flexibility that is made available, and how you avoid people just seeing the things that they want to see. The depth is like reading a newspaper. You read down as far as you're interested, and other things now can be pulled in to supplement those things.
I suppose audiences are increasingly comfortable and familiar with this sort of experience. And again, come back to social media. When you're consuming social media platforms, it's very much you can dive as deep as you want or go as wide as you want. Is this just a case of the more traditional film and television media playing catch up, or is this something different?
But there's no policy in social media. There's no one who's responsible for orchestrating the impartiality and the along all the way along down the conversations. It's just a sort of free for all, and it goes where it goes. Whereas I think there's a responsibility for the producers of object-based media to.
So I'm going to paraphrase another couple of questions that I think are quite interesting. And Julius, maybe one for you. If you create all of these options and paths that an audience member can go through to consume your story, elsewhere at BVE we've been discussing a lot about artificial intelligence, for example, being able to predict what people want to do. Ultimately, could you not just use that data to harvest the sort of optimal experience for somebody and go back to a simpler linear production, but based around what you know people want to consume? And saving all of that expense of extra shoots and extra content creation.
You could do, but then I could argue, why would you shoot a film in 3D, for example? You know, it's the same story, it's just about the back-end experience of the user. And as a content creator, that's the thing which I live for, basically. How does an audience take on this story, and how do they digest it, and what sort of emotional response do you get out of it? So as a content creator, I just see this as another tool which is going to enhance my storytelling abilities.
Can I take, I mean, I'm a keen supporter of the link between artificial intelligence and media creation, as this is the core of the digital creativity labs at University of York that I co-direct. And I think the potential for AI now to help us create better stories is immense. So in conversation with the AI tool, the production costs will be minimized as AI is becoming more and more clever. So the tools that we're using, rather than a blunt editing machine, could allow me to do a bit more at the top.
Great. Well, we're going to leave it there. We're going to have a little change of panel sessions now. Julius, you're staying with us. We're going to be joined by 3 other people who are going to take us through some of their examples of how they're using object-based media to enable them to tell stories for a modern audience. I'm sure you'll join me in thanking our panelists, and I hope you'll stay with us for the next part.